To end the Fed. Now, is the U.S. government shutting down the Federal Reserve? The U.S. government has put some bills forward that could be making a move to shut down the Federal Reserve, or at least take away much of its power. And as crazy as this sounds, it's actually been proposed before, when the Fed did certain things just like they've done today. Now, they say history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes, and it sure looks like history is repeating today as the Federal Reserve is once again under attack. But no one's even noticing that it's happening. So in this video, we will discuss what the government is doing now, how this worked in the past, the bills that have just been put forth and why, and of course, how to protect yourself from this war over the monopoly on money. So let's go. All right, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name is Mark Moss, and I make these videos to change the way you think about money because almost everything you've learned is wrong. And everything that you know about the government and the Federal Reserve is most likely wrong as well, of course, unless you're watching my videos on a regular basis. Now, I do want to mention to you, do not miss out. We're almost out of time for my Market Disruptors Live event. There's a link down below, Market Disruptors Live. Come find out from some of the best analysts in the world what they think is going to happen and what you should do to build, grow, and protect your wealth. Don't miss the chance to come meet us in person. Check it out, marketdisruptorslive.com. All right, now, before we look at the attack, we need to understand why someone would even want to attack the central banks. I mean, aren't they a necessity? Aren't they helping to stabilize and even save the entire global financial system? At least that's what the news would have us all believe, right? Well, since the Federal Reserve was founded in 1913, they've used their unchecked ability to create money out of thin air to create massive distortions to the economy and the financial markets. This 200-year chart of the Dow Gold ratio shows how the volatility of markets has absolutely exploded since the Fed began manipulating the money supply over 100 years ago, since their creation in 1913. You can see how the markets used to remain in that tight green channel all throughout the 1800s when we were on the gold standard. But then 1913 comes along, the Federal Reserve begins manipulating the money supply, and then boom, you can see how the volatility exploded. Now, we've all seen all the central banks of the world create massive asset bubbles all around the world over the past century. It's these policies that have devalued our money through the inflation that they've created. Through their money printing and inflation, they've eroded the purchasing power of the dollar by more than 99% since 1913. Now, remember, who benefits from inflation the most? Well, it's those who are in debt and have access to nearly unlimited amounts of debt. They're the ones that benefit from creating massive amounts of inflation. And who is that that has all the debt? Well, that's right. It's our governments all around the world. Now, the past century of fake fiat games have corrupted every aspect of our society. Wages aren't keeping up with the rapidly rising costs of living. People can't keep up. They can't feed their families. And now we're starting to see people revolting all around the world. Now, many people might ask, how much damage is too much damage? When would someone try to stand up to these central banking cartel criminals? Well, there have been many attempts made in the 20th century to return us to a gold standard and then strip the power from the hands of the central banks. Now, shout out to Congressman Ron Paul, who started the End the Fed campaign. And there was an attack again just last month that no one seemed to notice. Now, more on that in a minute. And so today, more than ever, we could be watching the repeat of the 1930s where there was a call to abolish the central bank. Have you ever heard of the Chicago Plan? It was a bill introduced by economist Irving Fisher in the mid-1930s at the height of the Great Depression. While the everyday person was suffering badly in the mid-1930s as unemployment rates hit 25% in the midst of the longest economic depression in history, the people were mad, and rightfully so, and they were demanding change. And a group of economists offered to change the system with something called the Chicago Plan, which was a solution to the Great Depression, which, unlike what you might have been taught, were a direct result caused by the actions of the central banks. Now, the Chicago Plan bill wanted to put an end to fractional reserve banking and introduce a quasi-debt jubilee in an attempt to end the boom and bust cycles that the central bank was causing by manipulating the money supply. Now, unfortunately, the plan ultimately failed because FDR shot the plan down because, of course, FDR was in favor of big government and wanted to increase the power of the federal government, not decrease it. And of course, he did just that. With the introduction of the FDIC Act in the 1935 Emergency Banking Act, and of course, the New Deal. Now today, many people are comparing the current economic situation we find ourselves in today and have called for a significant banking reforms like what was proposed 90 years ago. And the IMF actually released a paper in 2012 investigating the Chicago Plan, which they titled Revisiting the Chicago Plan. And the IMF concluded that the plan would have actually worked to lift the U.S. out of the Great Depression in the 1930s. Now, are we seeing the resurrection of the Chicago Bill today in 2022? The Chicago Bill, let's say 2.0, if you will. Now, don't you guys think that it's awfully coincidental that the IMF investigated the Chicago Plan in 2012, only a handful of years after the 2008 Great Financial Crash? Well, it sure looks like there are people who want to strip the Fed of its power. So let's take a look at this. Now, only a handful of weeks ago, on the 28th of March, a group of U.S. lawmakers introduced something called the E-Cash Act into the House Committee on Financial Services. Now, if the bill passed, the bill would allow the Treasury to test the creation and distribution of a digital dollar. So is this a central bank digital currency or a CBDC? Now, of course, I've been talking about the central banks around the world getting ready to launch their CBDCs, but this is eCash. All right? This eCash proposal is something completely different. Instead of the central bank doing this eCash would be created and managed by the Department of the Treasury. And by doing this, it would transfer the power to create money from the private bankers at the Federal Reserve to the employees at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Now, this transition would be something we haven't seen in centuries, and we could effectively call it a central government digital currency or a CGDC. Now, another interesting thing is that this eCash would have nothing to do with blockchain or distributed ledger. It would simply redefine legal tender and transfer money creation to the Treasury. Now, that's the key takeaway here to understand. The Treasury is also trying to sell this eCash to the user by advertising it as having the same privacy and anonymity as cash. They're claiming it would be a bearer instrument that can be transacted peer-to-peer. But the big question is, will the Fed just willingly roll over and allow the Treasury to issue its own money? Now, considering how hard it was for them to finally implement a central bank, I doubt they're going to go down without a fight. So I guess let's all grab some popcorn and watch. Now, I think it's going to be a very interesting battle over who controls the money in the United States. Another really thought-provoking point made in the bill was the reference to a quote-unquote greenback. Now, the Treasury says that the eCash will be a digital analog to the greenback. What's the important link here about the greenback dollar? Well, the original greenback dollar was actually created by the famous American president, Abraham Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln did exactly what the Treasury is proposing to do today when he created the greenback dollar in 1862. Now, during the American Civil War in 1861, President Lincoln quickly realized that the war was going to be more expensive than he originally envisioned. Now, Lincoln went with his secretary to the Treasury in New York to apply for some loans to fight the war. The bankers, who were wishing the Union to fall apart, offered Lincoln loans at predatory interest rates between 24 and 36%, which of course, President Lincoln declined. An old friend of Lincoln's, Colonel Dick Taylor of Chicago, was put in charge of solving the problem of how to finance the war. And his solution is recorded as this, quote, "Just get Congress to pass a bill authorizing the printing of full legal tender Treasury notes and pay your soldiers with them and go ahead and win your war with them also," end quote. Now, this is exactly what Lincoln did as he printed $450 million worth of the new bills using green ink on the back to distinguish them from the other notes, of course, greenback. Now, the introduction of the greenback dollar was very controversial at the time as it broke the link to the gold standard. And the central banking cartel doesn't like to be challenged, of course, and once Lincoln made this move, next thing you know, yep, he was assassinated. Coincidentally, of course, I'm sure, right? But that's just conspiracy talk, I guess, right? So anyway, let's focus back on the war over the control of money supply. So let's look at the bifurcation within the U.S. between the Treasury and the central bank. Now, the long-awaited results from Biden's executive order on crypto finally arrived in early March, which only makes this bifurcation even more interesting. The executive order requires the Treasury Department to investigate central bank digital currencies and report back to them within 180 days. However, central bank digital currencies don't appear to be popular with the members of the U.S. government. Earlier in January 2022, U.S. Representative Tom Emmer submitted a bill to disallow the Federal Reserve from creating a CBDC. Emmer said that, quote, requiring users to open up an account at the Fed to access a U.S. CBDC would put the Fed on an insidious path akin to China's digital authoritarianism, end quote. Also, Ted Cruz recently introduced a competing bill in March to outlaw the Fed from creating a CBDC. And then, 2 weeks after Biden's executive order, we have the Treasury proposing their e-cash idea. Now, the money wars are really starting to heat up today in 2022, and a CBDC would completely erode any semblance of privacy and give the Federal Reserve all commanding control and oversight over every aspect of our lives. Now, this would completely disintermediate the commercial banking system and all your banks like JP Morgan, Citibank, Wells Fargo. They'd all become completely irrelevant at that point. Now, the Treasury or the Fed could simply increase and decrease the money supply at will. Now, whether it be a CBDC or the digital greenback proposed by the Treasury, there's only one form of digital currency that requires zero trust. Of course, you already know what that one is. We're talking about Bitcoin, which we call trustless, which is 100% verifiably finite, and it affords every user great privacy if they use the privacy enhancing tools that are available when you used it correctly. Now, Bitcoin doesn't care what your political beliefs are. It's not subject to the censorship things that the government is trying to use with their central bank digital currencies and being pushed by the government. But what do you guys think? Who will win the money wars that are emerging here in the 21st century? Will it be the Federal Reserve hanging on to it? Will the Treasury usurp their power? Or will something else emerge like Bitcoin? I'd sure love to hear what you think. Leave me a comment down below. Of course, as always, give me a thumbs up on this video if you like it. And if you don't like the video, that's okay. Give me a thumbs down, but at least leave me a comment and let me know what I got wrong, I guess. All right, that's what I got for you today. To your success. I'm out.